We are about to chat with a mom who has experienced egregious abuse of power in child welfare. Join us today on Fostering the Future.
Welcome to the Fostering the Future podcast, a show about all things child welfare, dependency, adoption, and foster care. Here are your hosts, veterans in the world of child welfare, Jack and Kat.
We believe that every human has incredible and equal value regardless of what side of the courtroom we sit on. We hope that everyone feels welcome and accepted here on Fostering the Future.
Make sure you follow us on Facebook or Instagram as Fostering the Future Podcast, or check us out on our website at fosteringthefuturepodcast.org. Join us as we continue our conversation with Tasha. This seems so cut and dry. How could this judge be continuing to make these decisions? So my question was, who's paying off this judge?
So the judgment that she wrote, it didn't make sense as to how the ruling was that one-sided. Like Valentina mentioned, it made no mention of our genetics doctor in Florida who has been consulted on abuse cases where Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, specifically hypermobile type, has been involved. And he spoke to it and hit the Daubert. He was blocked and testifying in our trial, brought up Dr. Newberger. Dr. Newberger listed everything that the CPT doctor did wrong, ignored it. The judgment also said that my twin B, that the fractures could not have occurred at birth or in utero because my twin B had an x-ray done that didn't show any fractures. My baby had one chest x-ray at 2 days old, and that's when he had issues breathing. So I went back then and I looked at the report. When you're in nursing school, they teach you how to document. They tell you if an incident happens, you have to report it to risk management, yes, but you do not put it in the patient's chart that you reported to risk management, because if they file a lawsuit and it's in the patient's medical chart, you have opened a can of worms where then risk management gets pulled in because it's documented that you provided the report to risk management. That's what I had been taught in nursing school. And I said, okay, I'm going to look at the report. And I look at the report and the report says no acute findings. My baby is 2 days old. What would be there that's not acute, where you had to specify the word acute? So then we asked the last medical expert that we consulted, can you date these injuries? Dated the injuries. These rib fractures were at least stage 5 callus healing at the time it was found. Therefore, it was either prenatal or birth. The expert said, send me that 2-day-old image. Looks at the 2-day-old image, compares it with the 2-month-old image. There were rib fractures at the 2-day-old chest x-ray that were not acute because it had callus formation. And the callus formation takes about maybe a couple of weeks to develop. Therefore, the fractures were not acute. That's why there were no acute findings.
Why wouldn't they have noted that they were healed fractures? It's almost like, were they worried that something happened at birth and you were going to sue them for it?
I've seen a lot of things in the field, and so I wouldn't be surprised. When I saw the word acute, I'm like, why are you it just didn't make sense specifying acute when if the child is 2 days old, anything that would be there is acute. And so he confirmed there were rib fractures at 2 days old. Those rib fractures actually did have callus formation, indicating that twin B had fractures in utero, and that there were additional fractures that then showed up. But those additional rib fractures were in stage 5 callus healing. It would have been 7 to 9 weeks old. But guess what? I only had my baby for 6 weeks. So those fractures that he found stage 5 callus healing that then showed up at 2 months old were at least 7 to 9 weeks old, but he was in the NICU. So I only had my child for 6 weeks. And that means those fractures then occurred during hospitalization. So that then was presented and filed with the same court, with the same judge, denied. No hearing, no nothing. denied. Did more digging, investigation also on top of that. Found out that her family, they donate a lot of money to this particular children's hospital, part of the board of trustees.
Who donates money to this children's hospital?
The judge. The judge was on the board of the organization that like fundraises for it.
That seems like a conflict of interest.
And it wasn't like a little bit of money.
It's a lot of money.
So she's on the board of directors for the organization that fundraises for the children's hospital that accused you of abuse.
Correct. And then we later found that her father was also one of the directors or trustees actually for the hospital as well. And this was through tax documents from the hospital itself.
So then she was recused, right?
No, they denied our recusal request.
Who denied it?
The appeals court.
Wow.
First, we asked the trial judge to recuse herself because we had the new medical evidence stating the injury and we didn't want her to preside over that motion. She denied it and denied the motion to reopen again. And then we took the issue of her recusal up on appeal and we found out we lost that a couple days ago. So now we're chugging along with the rest of the appeal, basically.
So is it the same appeals court that just denied the recusal?
It won't necessarily be the same judges. You get a panel of 4, I believe it's 4, and there's 12 judges total. Basically, any move you make, you can get any combination. But yeah, it's a little worrisome. And we also had a nonprofit asked to write what's called an amicus, a friend of the court brief, on our behalf. And the 4th DCA denied that request as well. So they've already given us 2 blows.
Where does the criminal case stand?
Right now, the charges are still currently pending.
The criminal part is relevant because Tasha and her husband were advised to take the 5th in the first trial. So they took the 5th, as they have a constitutional right to do, and didn't testify about anything, I guess, from the birth forward. And then the judge weighed the fact that they didn't testify so heavily against them. It was like, you guys didn't explain yourselves. Well, the burden of proof is not on the parents. The burden of proof is on the state. I do take issue with that. It's obviously something we'll continue to argue. You're backed into a corner when they have criminal charges pending over you. I see it all the time. Parents don't testify or they just flat out sign surrenders because they've got the threat of prison over them.
That was held against us, even though we did take the 5th for the reason of our advisement, because when the criminal charges were filed, it was literally 2 weeks before the termination trial. We were planning to testify. We were actually on the witness list. So it doesn't mean that we weren't going to speak. It's just when the charges were filed, then we were like, you can't anymore. That's it. Even though they still put us on the stand and we just had to literally say plead the 5th to almost everything. One thing that I did say, I was prepared to speak today, but because of that, I cannot answer your questions. But I really, really was prepared to speak today. It's not that I didn't want to. It's just I'm listening to the people that I am paying to advocate for me. We just listened to what our attorney told us to do. That's all it was. It was just, you have pending criminal charges. Just don't testify to anything given the current situation and how this just kind of took a turn literally right before the termination trial.
The case law says they should have either sought a continuance because the criminal case was pending. Their state should have given them limited immunity, meaning testify in this trial, we're not going to use it against you for the criminal. And unfortunately, her counsel didn't ask for that. The judge also could have offered them immunity or a continuance on her own because she knew they had criminal charges pending. Again, another issue we're going to take up and argue, but it's really unfortunate that no one made that attempt because that would have made things a little stronger for us if someone had asked for a continuance or immunity.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask if that's what you would have done or not if you were their attorney at the time.
I'm not a criminal attorney, so I probably would have been consulting with criminal attorney friends. But now that I've researched it, I think I absolutely would have asked for immunity or a continuance. The problem is the state wants permanency for children. And here we are. It's been almost, well, not quite 2 years, a year and a half. And criminal case still doesn't move forward. So you can see a dependency court losing patience with continuances in that type of scenario. Their stuff moved so fast.
As a parent, at least you know, there was no child maltreatment, nobody hurt your children, because it wasn't just me in the home. We had a lot of people in and out of our house because I was on disability at the time. I wasn't even on maternity leave. I was on long-term disability at that point. I had a lot of people in and out of my house helping me. When these allegations come up as a parent, you're like, well, yeah, I get they're blaming me. I know I didn't do anything, but did somebody else do this to my kids? And it's not a good feeling. So it's reassuring to know, well, at least now I understand what took place. I understand what precautions need to be in place. My entire family understands the precautions that need to be in place for my kids. Everyone knows who has to care for them, the type of precautions that needs to be in place for them. It's just sad that the court system is the narrow-mindedness of the situation. I'm a Christian, and I believe certain things happen to you for a reason. And this was a situation I walked into, and I didn't even do nothing. It just happened. But as a provider for 11 years before losing my position, the diagnostic process when diagnosing child abuse needs to be changed. Here's an example. I made it a point and I explained to everybody, even before all of this happened, because I don't like to insult people's intelligence or other providers. I let them know, listen, my background is not pediatrics, but this is my thought process. Let me know what you think. When an adult has an x-ray done, your x-ray is a little bit abnormal. We're not sure if there's an issue. Let's do a bone density scan, because x-rays are not reliable for determining bone density. You do a bone density scan, it's either normal, you have osteopenia or osteoporosis. Now, in children, infants, they rely on x-rays and scans that are not necessarily reliable in determining bone density. Bone density exams or scans are more reliable, and that's the go-to if you want to determine someone's bone density. But unfortunately for children and infants, especially when it comes to the case of unexplained injuries or unexplained fractures in an infant, you don't have a go-to scan for that to determine the bone density. They look at an x-ray, they say, well, it looks normal. Of course it looks normal, because it's not necessarily that accurate in determining bone density, depending on the severity of it at that time. There has to be something else that's in place to properly diagnose these children. There also needs to be something properly in place where the child protection physician doesn't automatically mark a child as abused before undergoing the entire workup. The CPT report on my twins were released with allegations of abuse and neglect before we even initiated the workup. The termination of parental rights petition was filed before we even had any type of test results. They were 3 months old when they filed the TPR petition. Matter of fact, they filed the TPR petition right before they had repeated injuries. They continued with the TPR petition. In fact, it was an expedited TPR. And so they wanted to expedite the TPR before we even knew what was really wrong with the kids.
I mean, sheltered to trial, 5 months. That is incredibly fast. Even in cases that are supposed to be expedited, they often can take over a year for them to go to trial. And then the medical records weren't even subpoenaed until 2 months in. So you're looking at less than 3 months for people to prepare to defend their fundamental right to parent. That's it. And then this isn't easy stuff. This is complicated, layered medical, confusing stuff, not to mention expensive to have to go through. Yeah, it's crazy to me how fast their trial went. And knowing that Tasha's results, her genetic testing was still pending. They're like, oh, well, the kids came back. They don't have any of those things that we can test for, so we're good to go.
They were absolutely wrong. It has also come to my attention how common this is. When it happens to you, you feel like you're alone, but then you come to realize, no, you're not alone. And the sad part is there's an overrepresentation of multiples in these cases. And one thing that our doctors have pointed out, which the court didn't want to fully listen to that, is that having multiples plays a factor. In fact, the department's physician that they brought in actually stated twin pregnancy can cause weakened bones. It was said by their own doctor. And so if our doctor said it and your doctor said it, why are we here? If we're talking about injuries that dated to prenatally, there was actually a case study that was released. There was a mother who had hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, pregnant. The infant came out fractured. The fractures were from in utero. In fact, the fetus had 21 fractures. Let the mom had brought that baby to the hospital for something, fussiness, a random bruise, they would have found the 21 fractures and said, you abused your kid. But those fractures were in utero. Same diagnosis. In fact, the department's doctor said he had seen cases where mothers who he diagnosed himself with hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos, they had infants who then had unexplained injuries, but didn't want to believe that hypermobile EDS was a factor in it.
Yeah, he didn't want to consider it. He knew their moms had HEDS. And then they said, hey, my baby's got all these problems. Well, it's a baby, so I can't diagnose them.
It has to be related to something else. It can't be that. But you don't know. There's so many studies that's being done because they cannot put a finger on the actual mutation that will cause certain signs, symptoms, issues that would occur with hypermobile EDS. If it's 2024 and we don't have a genetic test for it yet, it's a lot we don't know. So for you to say, nope, doesn't cause it, doesn't do this, doesn't do that, but yet you have moms who have the diagnosis and then they had children who are then presenting with issues, including unexplained fractures. How do you not see the connection? And I don't know everything. But one thing I do know is in medicine, you have to think out the box and you have to stop putting everyone in this tunnel vision, like compartmenting patients. The experience that I have had in the field that I've worked in and the different patients I have taken care of, I have seen things I never even knew existed. You have to think outside of the box. Now, when you have an infant and you're too scared to put a diagnosis on that child because they're not old enough to do the Batten scale, in your opinion, how do you even know if it affects them like that or not if you have to wait until they're older? But then you attribute it because they're old, they're more mobile. It's one of those things where it just doesn't make sense.
It's like when you call one of those tech support or something like that, and they're following this flow chart, and it doesn't make sense, and it keeps leading you in this loop. Everybody doesn't follow the same flow chart. I was watching a training video this week from a child abuse pediatrician, and he was teaching other doctors how to be child abuse pediatricians. And he literally had this like checklist. Does the child have a mark on their body? A bruise, a burn, a cut, a scrape, a bite, a sunburn? Okay, yes. And then can you think of a way that someone could have prevented? Like, it was like these 3 or 4 questions. And he's like, don't be afraid to apply neglect or abuse to these cases. We're not going to worry about being punitive about the parents. And even if the parents didn't do anything intentional, like, we still want to call it this to raise awareness in the community. This guy in particular has diagnosed multiple of the Georgia parents with child abuse. And he's teaching other child abuse pediatricians in training here, don't be afraid to apply this diagnosis because we need to spread awareness. And even if the parents didn't intend to do anything, like, if you can think of some way where someone could have prevented this from happening, I mean, then every parent is abusive and neglectful. That is terrifying.
One of his suspicion on his suspicion index is breastfeeding and being a first-time parent in his training.
So you've had basically two TPR processes. The status is that your parental rights are terminated.
We're going through the appeals court now.
What has happened from then until now? Do you get visits?
I am still allowed to get visits.
So when the shelter happened, it was parents can visit supervised, but they have to be separate. And then, the second set of injuries, the department tried to move them from the family member. And so the solution was, well, we're just going to cut down the amount of time the parents can visit, because clearly otherwise they must have been abusing the kids on the supervised visits and caused a second set of injuries.
That was really the thought process, yes.
And that's essentially been the status quo for the most part. She's still supervised. I mean, the law in Florida is when the adoption is final, it is up to the caregivers, but we are well aware of the fact of how careful we need to be so that there are no new allegations. The one other thing I wanted to make sure we cover, because if I'm the listener, I'm going to think, well, they stopped getting injuries, so clearly it must have been the parents that were doing it or whatever. It's important to know, their bones will just naturally strengthen over time, right? Even with the condition, they're going to be less prone. Also, with caregivers who know that there's a problem and are handling them carefully and appropriately, and they had some, was it physical therapy and occupational? There have been things in place that also help explain, because I think the judge, he made a comment, they didn't get any more injuries.
They did when my twin B had the additional fracture. I don't know if floppy infant is the right term, but I mean, they used to fold like pancakes. The physical therapists had to work with both of them to get them sitting up straight, to getting them being able to crawl properly, to stand up. My poor twin A, every time they tried to fix him, he would cry because he's used to being a certain way. It was hard and he used to cry. They used to say, do tummy time. They used to have a hard time lifting up their head, and they would just plop their heads down and cry. They did physical therapy for a few months and it was like night and day with them. The same Florida geneticist, he did follow up with the twins for management purposes. And he explained again, they are getting better. Yes. They are getting stronger. Yes. But you still have to be mindful and careful. Had them placed on vitamin D supplementation that they were not on before. And so they have been on the supplementation and, of course, have been keeping his advisement in mind since that medical visit.
Vitamin D could definitely be part of strengthening their bones. And the other thing was it somewhere between 6 to 9 months when the injury stopped?
Yes.
Because a lot of the families that I've spoken with have been told by their doctors that around 6 to 9 months, some of these issues get significantly better. Like kids stop breaking their bones around 6 to 9 months. So if that's exactly the same time frame you had, like that's just more proof of what these doctors already say. But honestly, like for me, the dead ringer is that there were prenatal fractures. Like right there, prenatal fractures done. That should be all the evidence that you needed. Seeing this so prevalent right now has completely shaken the way that I view the world around me. So I'm curious how this whole situation has affected the way that you and your husband see the world, because you've been accused of something you didn't do.
You would hear stories like what you were saying about abuse of power, right? And I used to hear it too. And I used to try to say, no, it's a reason why they had to do that. No, you try to justify. You don't want to believe that the people that are in place to make sure the right thing is done, you don't want to believe that they are really that is that corrupted. And then something like this happens to you. In the beginning, I was like, no, I mean, it'll be fine. It's just protocol. They have to do their investigation. I even told them, like, look, I get it. It's fine. I understand, and then it just continued and continued. And then the lies happened. Then they were twisting the story. They accused me of living with my family member and said that that's why the repeated injuries occurred. I wasn't living with my family member. I'm already in a situation where my kids were taken out of my home. Am I really going to be that stupid to jeopardize them being moved somewhere else with a stranger? That's not something I would do. And they blocked me from seeing my kids in the hospital. They blocked me. And then they said it came from the CPI investigator who informed social work. And that was not true because the court order and the judge specifically said parents can go see their children. As long as there's the hospital staff is there, the parents can see their children. After the accusing child protection doctor from the initial hospital showed up to the other hospital, I started to get treated differently to the point where a medical student yelled at me. You look at the case and you can tell it makes absolutely no sense, but you want to have my children adopted. For what? What you're alleging is not true. The type of pressure that they apply, it's almost as if now you understand why people give false confessions. But I was not going to admit to something that I did not do. Your perspective completely changes. You're crooked, you're all crooked.
I think Tasha is probably stronger than all of us. Like, I don't know how she gets up every day and goes through the day. I think about it constantly, what torture this must be for her. The fact that she's even here telling her story and keep going every day is incredibly impressive.
It's not easy even speaking openly or publicly about this, but then at the same time, how many families are scared to speak up because they're scared of the judgment? They're scared of retaliation. When it comes down to it, this is going on almost 2 years already. They have already stripped me of everything. You assassinated my character. You labeled me with a mental health diagnosis I did not have. What's she going to do to me now? I'm still here, though, and I'm still telling you the same story. It's sad the amount of families that are going through this. I hope that I would eventually be able to assist in advocating for parents who don't know how to look at medical records. What about those parents who don't know that I need my child to have genetic testing? And then you have these statistics that are out there where it gives these percentages of children who are abused. What part of those statistics are skewed due to misdiagnosis? If you apply a misdiagnosis and swear up and down it's true, that's going to be applied to the statistics, but it's a misdiagnosis. So it's actually not accurate. What I do know that needs to be changed, though, for sure, is the way that they evaluate child abuse cases in the hospitals. They cannot label children as abused the moment they come into the ER with something. radiologists need to date injuries more accurately. As a provider, you have differential diagnoses that you come up with. You work up your differential diagnoses. And what I'm seeing or hearing about other cases such as mine and what I have seen in our case is that they didn't have their differentials. They just had one and ran with it. There has to be change within the healthcare system. There needs to be changes in the laws in Florida. Texas passed the Texas Family Code when a situation like mine's happened there and allowed parents who are accused to have second opinions and to take into consideration various disorders, including Ehlers-Danlos syndrome and metabolic bone disease. Arkansas did the same thing. It's time for Florida to get it together.
We want to help. We want to stop these types of things from happening in the future. And we all want to know what we can do to help in your case specifically. What can people do to throw support behind you in your case as you're moving towards your appeal?
Probably stating the obvious. This has been devastating for them, financially, losing her job and legal bills, expert medical bills, etc. She didn't tell me to say this, but I'm sure she could use help.
Is there like a Gifts and Go or a GoFundMe or something that you have set up that we could put a link to on the episode page?
We could get one going.
Are there people that we could reach out to and write letters to or call and try and make sure they're paying attention to the fact this is an incredible injustice?
Jack and Christy, you know my feelings about reporting these people. It gets you nowhere. But sure, I mean, I think big picture, it won't help Tasha, but everybody needs to pay attention to the politics of it all and legislation and lobbying. Tasha could fire me if she wanted. I've offered for her to fire me. I don't know what else to do.
Because if there was something you knew to do, that you would have done it. Right?
I mean, we really, aside from the fact that we weren't there from day one and there's things I would have done differently, if the fix was in, maybe it would have made a difference anyways. But I am baffled. I'm just praying that the DCA does the right thing.
Yeah. Well, what advice would you have for someone else who is just getting into, aside from don't plead the fifth?
I told you that in the beginning when I was giving the rundown about myself. First generation, my parents immigrated from third world country, first in my family to get a college degree. We have a term, pressure bursts pipe, but it also makes diamonds. One thing about a diamond, it has to go through intense pressure, intense heat. But once the diamond goes through the pressure and the heat and the cut, can't be broken anymore. It will be a lot of pressure. It will be a lot of heat. There will be a lot of humiliation. There will be a lot of tears. There will be a lot of frustration. There will be a lot of, God, why is this happening to me? I didn't do anything. Make them listen. But you get to the point where you stop being scared. You say, look, I'm not standing for this. Somebody's going to give me back my kids. I don't know who is going to give them back to me. Somebody's going to give them back to me. Because even though I've been hearing no a lot, I'm still only one yes away. And so you have to remind yourself, I may have been hearing no a lot, but I'm only one yes away. And when you hold on to that and you hold on to that hope and you didn't do anything, no one around you did anything, there's something wrong with your children that needs to be paid attention to, you fight and you don't stop. Be a diamond.
Thank you so much for joining us today. Make sure you subscribe and follow us on social. We hope that you join us again next time and keep on fostering the future.